I stood in the kitchen, gently stirring the bubbling tomato sauce on the stove. The smell of fresh lasagna filled the air, a dish I used to make when we wanted a quiet, comforting night at home. But tonight, the warmth in the oven couldn't touch the cold tension hanging in the air. My 5-year-old son, Eli, sat at the kitchen table, kicking his legs under the chair and humming softly to himself, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind him. I had just set his plate down in front of him when I heard the garage door creak open. Brad was home. The front door slammed shut a few seconds later, and heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. I didn't have to turn around to know the look on his face. He had that kind of anger you could feel from across the room, silent, sharp, and boiling just under the surface. "Savannah maxed out her credit card again," Brad said flatly as he walked in, tossing his keys onto the counter like a man throwing down a gauntlet. "She's being charged overdraft fees. She needs help." I kept my back to him, plating our dinners and forcing my hands to stay steady. "We've already helped her twice this month, Brad." "She's my sister," he snapped. "I know. But Eli's preschool tuition is due next week. And I've already paid the electric bill early, because we almost missed it last month." Brad scoffed. "So, you always find a way. Just use your savings." I finally turned to face him. "Brad, I told you there's nothing left in savings. And even if there were, we can't keep enabling her every time she blows through her money on." "What did she buy this time?" "Designer shoes." He stared at me, jaw tightening. I watched his eyes flick toward Eli, who was still happily eating, then back to me. "She's family," he said through clenched teeth. "So is Eli," I replied, my voice low but firm. "And I'm tired of choosing between feeding our son and bailing your sister out of her own messes." That was it. I could see it in his face. The switch flipped. Without a word, Brad reached down, grabbed the plate of steaming lasagna I had just set in front of him, and hurled it at me. The world slowed for a second. The hot plate crashed against my chest, scorching sauce splattering across my neck, arm, and shirt. The ceramic dish shattered on the tile floor with a sound that rang in my ears. I staggered back, gasping, the heat of the food burning into my skin. Pain flared up my arm, and I instinctively grabbed a kitchen towel, pressing it against my chest. But what hurt more, what truly broke me, was the sound of Eli screaming. He had jumped out of his chair, his fork clattering to the floor, eyes wide with pure terror. "Mommy!" Brad didn't even look at him. He stood over me, breathing hard, chest rising and falling like an animal ready to pounce. "You never listen," he growled. "You always make everything harder than it has to be." I held Eli behind me with one arm, my other hand still gripping the towel to my neck. "Get out," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Go cool off. Just go." Brad stared at me for a beat, his nostrils flaring, fists clenched, then turned and stormed out of the kitchen. The front door slammed again a second later. Silence. Eli clung to my leg, tears streaming down his cheeks. I knelt down slowly, wincing as the heat from the sauce pressed deeper into my skin. "I'm okay, baby," I whispered, though my voice trembled. "It's okay." But it wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. And now he had crossed a line I couldn't pretend didn't exist. That night, after Eli finally cried himself to sleep in my arms, I stood in the dark hallway of our house that no longer felt like home. I looked down at the blister forming on my shoulder, and knew with absolute clarity, I couldn't stay. Not for him. Not for Eli. Not anymore. Eli finally drifted off, curled beside me in bed, his tiny hand resting on my arm like a lifeline. I lay stiff, staring at the ceiling, the pain in my neck pulsing steadily, the air in the room thick with something unspoken. I had no more excuses. No more maybe next times, or, if he just calms down. He'd thrown a plate of hot food at me, in front of our son. That wasn't a bad moment. That was abuse. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, trying not to wake Eli. I tiptoed down the hall and into the bathroom, flicking on the light. My reflection startled me. My shirt was stained with red sauce, my neck blotched and tender. There were small blisters forming near my collarbone. I opened the cabinet and pulled out the aloe vera I kept for sunburns. As I applied it to the burn, I tried to swallow the knot forming in my throat. It wasn't just the pain. It was everything. How had I become this woman? quiet, obedient, scared to upset her husband, terrified of what might happen if she said no. The image that haunted me most wasn't even Brad's face. It was Eli's. His wide, tear-filled eyes. His little voice crying, "Mommy." That's when it hit me. If I stayed, Eli would grow up thinking this was normal. That screaming manipulation and violence were just part of marriage. That women didn't get to say no. I had to leave. For him. For me. I moved quickly but quietly, adrenaline taking over. I pulled an old duffel bag from the back of the closet and started stuffing it with essentials. Clothes for both me and Eli, toiletries, a few of his favorite bedtime books, and the worn stuffed fox he slept with every night. In the kitchen, I grabbed a small tin box hidden behind the cereal, my emergency cash. Over the past year, I've been squirreling away tips from custom cake orders. Never sure why I was doing it. Maybe part of me always knew. I slid open the drawer next to the fridge and pulled out both our passports, my driver's license, insurance cards, and birth certificates. I didn't know where we were going yet, but I knew I'd need them. The house was so quiet it hurt. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the fridge. I stood there a moment longer, letting the reality sink in. This was the house we bought right after our wedding. The place where I decorated the nursery, where I once imagined hosting Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties in the backyard. Now all I felt was a deep, pressing weight in my chest. I wrote a quick note, not to Brad but for myself. Just 5 words scrawled on a sticky note. "You are not crazy. Leave." I folded it and tucked it into my wallet. Once everything was packed, I went back into the bedroom. Eli had rolled onto his back, mouth slightly open, the fox clutched in his arms. My chest tightened. "Sweetheart," I whispered, brushing his hair gently. "We're going on an adventure." He stirred, eyelids fluttering. "Is Daddy coming?" I paused. "No, baby. Just you and me for now." He nodded sleepily, as if that made perfect sense, and snuggled deeper into my chest as I carried him out to the car. The night air was cold, biting. I buckled Eli into his booster seat, threw the duffel in the trunk, and started the car with shaking hands. The dashboard clock read 12:41 a.m. I didn't look back. I drove for 20 minutes, heart racing every time headlights came into view, half convinced Brad was already out looking for us. But he wasn't. He didn't even know I was gone yet. I pulled into the driveway of a modest ranch-style home with a string of warm porch lights glowing faintly in the dark. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the house. Rachel's house. We hadn't seen each other much in recent years. Life, distance, Brad's possessiveness, they all got in the way. But if there was one person I knew would never turn me away, it was her. I texted her. "Are you awake? I need help. Please." The porch light brightened within seconds. The door opened. She stood there in flannel pajamas, messy bun, no makeup, just pure concern in her eyes. I stepped out of the car, Eli asleep in my arms. Rachel met me halfway down the walkway, took one look at the bruise on my neck and the redness in my eyes and simply said, "Come in." She didn't ask questions at first, just helped me settle Eli onto the pull-out couch in her guest room, covered him with a blanket, and handed me a cup of chamomile tea. Only after we were both sitting at her kitchen table, staring at each other across the steam, did she speak. "Melissa," she said gently, "what happened?" And I told her. Not everything, not yet, but enough. The lasagna, the burn, the look on Eli's face, the silence afterward. She reached across the table and took my hand. "You did the right thing." "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "I have no plan, no job, no idea where we'll live. What if he tries to take Eli? What if? Then we'll figure it out," she said firmly. "Together. One step at a time." And in that moment, something inside me finally shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone in my corner. As the sky outside turned pale with early morning light, I curled up next to Eli, listening to his slow, steady breathing. My mind was still spinning with what-ifs and unknowns. But I knew one thing for sure. We weren't going back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of cereal pouring into a bowl, and the faint hum of morning cartoons. For a second I forgot where I was. Then I sat up and remembered everything: the burn, the plate, Eli's scream, and the fact that I had finally left. Rachel was in the kitchen with her youngest, Hudson, who was giggling at something on TV. Eli was next to him, quietly eating Cheerios, his fox tucked between his arm and the table. It was the calmest I'd seen him in days. "Morning," Rachel said gently, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. "You slept hard." "Yeah. Thanks again for letting us stay," I said, sitting down and wrapping my hands around the warm mug. She waved me off. "You could stay here for 6 months, and I still wouldn't call it long enough." I smiled faintly, but there was a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. Now that the adrenaline had worn off, the questions started piling up. What now? Where will we live? How do I protect Eli? What if Brad finds us? As if reading my mind, Rachel sat down beside me and said, "I know someone. A family lawyer. She helped my cousin get out of a really bad marriage last year. No pressure, but if you're ready to talk to someone, I can call her for you." My stomach twisted. The word lawyer made it all feel more real, more permanent. But maybe that was what I needed. I nodded. "Please. I think I'm ready." That afternoon we met Helen Cross, a sharply dressed woman in her early 40s with a calm, steady presence and kind but no-nonsense eyes. Her office smelled like lavender and old books, strangely comforting. After Rachel introduced us, Helen gestured for me to sit across from her desk. "Take your time," she said. "Whatever you're comfortable sharing." At first the words came slowly. I told her about the lasagna, about Eli seeing everything, and about Brad's long-standing pattern of financial control, how I wasn't allowed to have my own bank account, how every major purchase had to be cleared through him. I mentioned how Savannah, his sister, was constantly borrowing money, and I always had to be the one to clean up the mess. "I've tried to leave before," I admitted, "but he always made me feel guilty, like I was abandoning the family, or ruining Eli's future." Helen leaned forward, her tone firm but empathetic. "Melissa, what Brad's been doing to you, this isn't just toxic. It's abuse. Emotional, financial, and now physical. You did the hardest part already. You left. Now it's time we protect you and your son." My throat tightened. "Can he take Eli from me?" "He'll try." She nodded solemnly. "I won't lie to you, he might try. But based on what you've told me, and especially if we can document your injuries and what Eli witnessed, we can file for emergency custody and a protective order to keep Brad away." I blinked, barely able to process the phrase emergency custody. "You won't be alone in this," Helen added gently. "But we have to act quickly. I can have paperwork ready by tomorrow." That night, after putting Eli to bed in Rachel's guest room, I sat at her kitchen table filling out forms. Custody petitions, protective order requests, a formal statement describing everything that happened, starting with the lasagna and stretching back over the years of control, isolation, and fear. My hand trembled as I signed my name at the bottom of each page. "Is it wrong," I asked Rachel softly, "that I feel guilty? That I'm afraid of being mean?" She looked up from her laptop, where she was helping me draft a new email account. "You're not being mean, Mel. You're being brave. You're protecting your son. That's the kindest thing you can do." I stared at the burn on my collarbone in the kitchen mirror. It was healing, but the redness was still there. Proof. Evidence. A boundary I should have drawn a long time ago. The next morning, Helen filed the emergency petition for custody. She also helped me shut down our joint accounts, flag my credit to prevent Brad from opening anything in my name, and started gathering evidence, from text messages to medical photos. Rachel drove me to a nearby walk-in clinic so a nurse could document the burn professionally. I hated stripping off my shirt to show the wound, but the nurse's face said everything. She'd seen this before. While we waited for the doctor to sign off on the report, I checked my phone. 17 missed calls. 9 voicemails. Dozens of texts. All from Brad. "Where are you? You can't take my son. You're making a huge mistake. Come home. Now. You'll regret this. Don't do this to Eli. Don't do this to me." My hands shook as I deleted them. Rachel peered over my shoulder. "Block his number. Now." I did. That night, I lay in bed next to Eli, who was finally breathing peacefully again. I couldn't sleep though. My mind kept spinning, asking the same question over and over. Am I strong enough to do this? But somewhere deep down, I already knew the answer. Not because I felt brave. Not because I had all the answers. But because I was his mother. And he deserved a future that didn't smell like fear. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Rockies when I stood on Rachel's porch, sipping coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. The sky was painted in soft pinks and oranges, and for the first time in a long time I felt something close to peace. It was a strange feeling, foreign but not unwelcome. Inside, I could hear Eli giggling at cartoons with Hudson. That sound alone was worth every sleepless night I'd endured since we left. Rachel stepped outside and leaned on the railing beside me. You've got that faraway look, she said, taking a sip from her own mug. I'm trying to remember who I was before all this, I replied. Before Brad. Before I stopped recognizing myself. Rachel didn't say anything at first. Just let the silence settle between us. Then she said, You're not her anymore. You're stronger. And I think I have just the thing to help. Later that morning, Rachel made a call to her neighbor, Tammy Rivera, who ran a small but popular culinary workshop center in town. Once she found out I used to work as a pastry chef, Tammy invited me over that same afternoon to talk. The workshop was cozy, nestled in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls, warm lighting, and the sweet smell of cinnamon and sugar hanging in the air. Shelves were lined with baking tins, cookbooks, and student-made cookie art. It felt like a place made of comfort and second chances. Tammy was mid-40s, sharp-eyed and cheerful, with a laugh that filled a room. Rachel says you've got magic hands with buttercream, she grinned, shaking mine. How would you feel about teaching a beginner's baking class? Just Saturday mornings. Nothing fancy. But we're swamped this season. I'd love that, I said, stunned by how quickly the answer came. And I meant it. That Saturday, I stood in front of a group of 6 women in flour-dusted aprons, each nervously eyeing their first attempts at kneading dough. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory kicking in as I demonstrated the proper technique. Cracked jokes, gave tips, adjusted posture, and they listened, really listened. By the end of class, the women were laughing and holding up warm cinnamon rolls like trophies. A few asked if I'd be teaching again. I walked out of the workshop with flour on my jeans, powdered sugar in my hair, and a smile on my face that I hadn't worn in months. Back at Rachel's, Eli ran up to me and hugged my legs. Mommy, guess what? I drew a spaceship, and I put you and me and Foxy inside. He pulled me toward the fridge, where Rachel had proudly hung his drawing, a crooked rocket with Mom plus me plus Foxy, scrawled under 3 stick figures. I knelt down and kissed his forehead. That's the best spaceship I've ever seen, I whispered. And just like that, the ache in my chest softened. But even in the peace, there were moments that clawed at me. One evening, as I was brushing Eli's teeth, he looked at me in the mirror and said, Daddy got really mad 'cause you said no. Is he gonna be mad forever? I froze, my toothbrush in midair. I turned to face him. Sweetheart, I said slowly, sometimes grown-ups get mad, but it's never okay to hurt someone because you're angry. Daddy made a mistake. And it's not your fault. He nodded solemnly, and I kissed the top of his head. Later, when he was asleep, I sat on the floor outside his room and cried silent, heaving sobs that had waited weeks to be released. The following Monday, I received a voicemail from Helen. Melissa, just an update. The emergency custody was granted. Brad's petition to reverse it was denied. He has supervised visitation only, pending a psychological evaluation. Call me when you can. I listened to the message 3 times before it sank in. We were safe. That night, Rachel poured us both glasses of wine. So, she asked with a grin, how does it feel to be a badass? I laughed, probably for the first time since leaving Brad. Terrifying, I said honestly. And also, kind of amazing. You've come so far, Mel, she said, clinking her glass to mine. I'm proud of you. I stared down at the deep red swirl in my glass. I'm not where I want to be yet, but for the first time in a long time, I believe I can get there. The next few weeks flew by. I taught 2 more classes at the culinary center. Tammy asked if I wanted to help develop a new seasonal menu. I opened a private Instagram account to post some of my favorite creations. And within days, old clients, people I thought had forgotten me, were commenting and asking if I was taking custom orders again. Little by little, pieces of my old life returned, not to drag me backward, but to remind me that I still had worth, that I was more than Brad's wife. I was Melissa, a mother, a teacher, a baker, a survivor. Then came the day Eli brought home a drawing from preschool. It was a house with 2 people and a giant orange fox. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, it said, "Me and Mommy, our new home." And for the first time in forever, I knew we were going to be okay. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and cold air. I sat on a hard bench outside the courtroom, my fingers knotted tightly in my lap, trying to focus on my breathing. In for 4 out for 4. I had read that somewhere online, something about calming your nervous system. Didn't work. Eli was at preschool with Rachel. I kissed him twice that morning, once on the forehead, once on the fox he still carried everywhere. He didn't ask where I was going. I think part of him already knew. Helen sat beside me, calm as always, a thick leather folder resting on her lap. "He's going to try to rattle you," she said, looking me in the eye. "Stay grounded. Speak the truth. You don't owe him anything. Not an apology, not a reaction." I nodded, but my stomach was a storm. A moment later, the door to the courtroom opened and Brad walked in. He wore the same navy blazer he used to wear to job interviews. His hair was perfectly combed. He even smiled, that fake, too wide grin he used when charming people at work events. But his eyes locked onto mine, and there it was. The same cold calculation. The same control. He didn't look remorseful. He looked entitled. The judge was a middle-aged woman named Justice Morales, sharp, composed, and with a face that didn't reveal much. She began the hearing by reviewing the petition for emergency custody and the temporary restraining order already granted. Brad's attorney, a polished man named Mr. Denton, started first. "Your Honor, my client simply wishes to restore balance. He's a devoted father. The claim of abuse is a misunderstanding, an exaggerated reaction to a heated moment." My jaw clenched. Helen stood next. Calm, precise, armed. "Your Honor," she began. The heated moment involved my client being assaulted with a plate of hot food in front of their 5-year-old child. This is not an isolated incident, but part of a long-standing pattern of emotional and financial abuse. She presented photos of the burn on my shoulder, text messages Brad had sent, and a signed statement from Eli's preschool teacher who noted behavioral changes in the weeks prior. Then I was called to the stand. My heart pounded as I took the oath. I could feel Brad's eyes on me as I sat. "Melissa," Helen said gently, "can you describe the events of the evening you left?" I took a breath. I had just served dinner. Eli was at the table. Brad was angry because I wouldn't give money to his sister again. I said no. He stood, picked up the plate, and threw it at me. It hit my chest and shoulder. The food was still hot. Eli saw the whole thing. He screamed. Helen nodded. "What did you do after that?" "I took Eli. I left that night and stayed with a friend. I filed for custody and protective orders the next morning." Helen showed the medical report. "And you were treated for first-degree burns, correct?" "Yes." Then came Denton's turn. "Mrs. Hayes," he began smoothly, "isn't it true that your husband provided for the household while you worked part-time? That he paid for Eli's daycare, your car, your health insurance?" I straightened. "He paid for those things. Yes. But he also controlled everything. I wasn't allowed to have my own bank account. I had to ask for grocery money like a child." "You never reported any abuse before, did you?" "No," I said. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of your husband?" he asked with mock surprise. I turned to the judge. Afraid of what would happen to my son if I stood up to him. Then Brad took the stand. He was calm, charming. He spoke about family values, how hard he worked, how lost he'd felt when I left, how he only wanted his family back together. Justice Morales watched him carefully. Then she asked, "Mr. Hayes, did you throw a plate of hot food at your wife in front of your son?" Brad hesitated. His smile slipped. I lost my temper," he admitted. "It was just a moment. I didn't mean to hurt her." People get angry. And when your wife refused to give her credit card to your sister, is that what triggered this anger? Brad's face reddened. Savannah was in trouble, she needed help. Melissa was being unreasonable. Helen stood instantly. Your Honor, I think we've just proven emotional manipulation under oath. Justice Morales raised a brow. Indeed. We were dismissed while she deliberated. 20 minutes passed like molasses. I paced the hallway staring at the clock, hands ice cold. Then the bailiff opened the doors. Everyone returned to the courtroom. Justice Morales looked down at her notes, then directly at us. This court finds sufficient evidence to grant the temporary sole custody of the child to the petitioner, Melissa Hayes. Supervised visitation rights may be granted to Mr. Hayes pending completion of a psychological evaluation and anger management course. A 6-month protective order will remain in place until the divorce proceedings are resolved. Brad's mouth dropped open. What? He snapped, standing. She's lying. This is insane. You're ruining my life. Justice Morales didn't blink. Mr. Hayes, one more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. He sat down hard, red-faced and fuming. And just like that it was over. Back in the hallway, Helen shook my hand. You did it, she said simply. I exhaled one long, shaky breath. My body had held that breath for months, maybe years. Rachel met me at the front doors with a tight hug. You were amazing, she said. I was terrified, I whispered. But you stood up to him. That's more than most people ever do. As we stepped outside, the cold air hit me again. But this time, I didn't shrink into myself. This time I stood up straight. Because this time he didn't win. The keys felt heavy in my hand as I stood outside the small second-floor apartment. It wasn't much, just a studio with thin walls, old carpet, and a view of a parking lot, but it was mine. Ours. Eli clutched his fox in one hand and my fingers in the other. Is this our new house, Mommy? I knelt down beside him. It is. It's not big, but it's cozy. And it's just for us. He nodded solemnly, taking it all in with the quiet seriousness only a 5-year-old can summon. Then as I unlocked the door, he grinned and shouted, Race you inside. The apartment smelled faintly of new paint and lemon cleaner. It was empty except for a folding table, 2 borrowed chairs, and the boxes Rachel had helped us carry up the stairs. Our mattress was still rolled up in plastic, propped against the wall. But in that moment it felt like a castle. We spent the day unpacking, mostly toys and kitchen supplies. I set up Eli's books in a milk crate near the window, placed his nightlight beside the mattress, and let him choose where to hang his rocket ship poster. That night, we lay side by side on the mattress, the room dark except for a small glow. Are we gonna stay here forever? Eli asked softly. I hesitated. Maybe not forever, but for a good while. Can we get pizza sometimes? He asked. I laughed. Absolutely. With extra cheese. He smiled and snuggled in closer. The first week in the apartment was quiet, almost eerily so. No footsteps stomping down the hallway.
No door slamming.
No tense silences filled with invisible threats. Just me, Eli. And the sound of wind brushing against the window. At first, I flinched every time someone knocked on a neighbor's door. I kept my phone close. Double-locked everything. Slept with a flashlight by the bed. But gradually, my body began to let go of its constant alarm. I started breathing deeper. Sleeping longer. Waking up without a rock in my chest. Tammy at the Culinary Center offered me extra teaching shifts, and soon I was running a Wednesday night, baking for beginners course alongside my Saturday classes. I loved it, the simple joy of flour-dusted countertops, messy bowls of frosting, and students laughing at their lopsided cupcakes. Rachel helped me build a little website where people could order custom birthday cakes again. I called it Butter and Bold. Orders came slowly at first, then more steadily. Cupcakes for a baby shower. A gender reveal cake. A chocolate raspberry tiered wedding cake that made me cry when I delivered it, because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be good at something that was entirely mine. One Tuesday, I got a voicemail from Eli's preschool teacher. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. Eli's been more talkative, more playful. He's opening up. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I sat at my tiny kitchen table and cried. Not from sadness. From relief. Rachel dropped by often, always bringing something. A microwave. A rug she found on Facebook Marketplace. A thrifted set of measuring spoons in rainbow colors for Eli. "You need color in your kitchen," she said, tossing the bag onto my counter. "It's the rule." "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," I told her one night as we folded laundry together on my mattress. She shrugged. "You'll help someone else someday. That's how it works." One afternoon, I took Eli to the park. It was chilly but sunny, and he ran across the playground like he'd just discovered gravity didn't apply to 5-year-olds. I sat on the bench, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, watching him swing higher and higher. Another mom sat beside me with a baby strapped to her chest. She smiled politely and we started talking.
I'm Melissa,
I said. It felt strange at first, introducing myself without any attachment to Brad. Just me. No hyphen. No baggage. Just Melissa. That night, after Eli fell asleep, I lit a candle and sat at the small desk I'd set up near the window. The wind rattled the glass, but the room was warm, and my laptop hummed quietly as it booted up. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked at me. I blinked back. Then I began to write. Not a resume. Not a court statement. Just me. My story. From the lasagna. To the fox. To the night I drove away. To this small, quiet apartment with the best kind of silence. The words didn't come easily at first, but then they poured out raw, messy, honest. I called the file. The softest exit, how I left and lived. A week later, Rachel read the first few pages and said, "You should share this one day." "I might," I said. "When I'm ready." She smiled. "You're already more ready than you think." And maybe she was right, because as I looked around my tiny, imperfect, beautiful apartment, with Eli curled up safe in his bed and the scent of vanilla still lingering from the cupcakes we baked earlier, I realized something. I didn't just leave Brad. I found myself. And I was never going back. It started with an email. The subject line was just one word. Talk. No greeting. No apology. No explanation. Just, "I think we should talk. You can't keep Eli away from me forever. Let's be adults about this. I'm willing to forgive you. Let's meet. Forgive me." As if he were the one who'd been hurt. I stared at the screen. Not angry, just tired. This was so classic Brad. The manipulation cloaked in civility. The twisted logic that made him the victim in every story. I didn't respond. 2 days later, Rachel called while I was teaching a class. "Hey," she said urgently. "Brad showed up at Eli's preschool. He tried to sign him out." My blood ran cold. "What?" Staff recognized him and stopped him. "He left before police arrived, but they're filing an incident report now." "Melissa, I think he's testing the boundaries." The next morning, I was in Helen's office, shaking but clear-eyed. "He's escalating," I said. "What can we do?" Helen didn't hesitate. "We file for a permanent protective order and move to limit visitation even further. We've got legal grounds now. He violated the current order by approaching your son." The court date came fast. This time, I wasn't nervous. I was angry. Not the kind of fury that makes you slam doors, but the quiet, icy kind that carves your decisions in stone. Brad arrived in a gray suit, looking like he hadn't slept, but still trying to project control. He even nodded to me when I entered the room, like we were old friends meeting for lunch. I ignored him. When the judge asked him to speak, Brad launched into a speech about fatherhood, love, second chances. "Melissa won't let me see my son," he said, voice trembling. "She's punishing me. I made one mistake." Helen stood and calmly handed over the preschool's incident report, the previous ruling, the clinic photos, the stream of emails and voicemails Brad had sent me over the past month, each one more entitled than the last. Then the judge asked if I wanted to say anything. I stood slowly. My son watched his father throw a burning plate of food at his mother. He saw me hurt and he saw it happen in silence. That kind of silence teaches a child that violence is love. And I won't let him grow up believing that. Brad's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. "I've spent months rebuilding my life," I continued, voice steady. "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking peace. But if you force me to choose between that and protecting my child, then I'll choose protection. Every single time. The judge ruled in our favor. The restraining order was extended for 5 years. Brad was denied unsupervised visitation indefinitely. Any contact would go through my lawyer. When the gavel came down, something inside me shifted, like a door clicking shut for good. Brad didn't say a word when he left the courtroom. He didn't look at me. Maybe for the first time he realized he'd lost control. That night I took Eli to the park. He ran across the grass, arms spread like airplane wings, wind in his hair. I watched from the bench, smiling calm. A woman nearby was reading on a blanket. She looked up and said, "That your little guy?" I nodded. "Yeah. He's my whole world." She smiled. "He looks happy." "He is," I said, surprising myself with how true it sounded. "We both are." When we got home, I found a small package waiting at the door. No return address. My first instinct was to feel afraid. But when I opened it, I found only a folded piece of paper. 2 words in Brad's handwriting. "I'm done. No epaledi." No closure. Just done. I dropped it into the trash without a second thought. Weeks passed. Then months.
Eli thrived.
I expanded my cake business, even hired a high school intern. My baking classes were booked solid. I stopped flinching at loud knocks. One morning, while packing orders, I looked up at my little apartment. The sunlight catching the mixing bowls, Eli's artwork taped to the fridge, a cupcake cooling on the sill. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was living. Later that evening, as Eli curled into my lap with his fox, I asked him, "Do you feel safe here?" He nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, it's home." I kissed his forehead, tears prickling behind my eyes. "You're my brave boy, you know that?" He looked up at me. "You're the brave one, Mommy. You saved us." And in that moment I knew. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the start of something beautiful. Something ours. The bakery smelled like cinnamon and citrus. It was early, barely 6 a.m. But the ovens were already warm. The frosting bowls lined up in pastel shades, and soft jazz playing over the speakers. I moved around the kitchen with ease, piping rosettes onto cupcakes as the sky outside blushed with the first light of day. The bell over the front door jingled. Miss Melissa." Eli's voice rang out like sunshine. I turned, smiling, just in time to catch my now 6-year-old launching himself into a hug. Rachel followed behind him, holding his backpack and coffee in hand. "Your breakfast tornado has arrived," she said with a grin, handing me the cup. "He couldn't wait to tell you." "Tell me what?" I asked, crouching to Eli's level. He beamed. "I got picked to read my story at family night next week. Mrs. Cooper said I was brave and used good-feeling words." I hugged him tight, pride swelling in my chest. "That's amazing, baby. I can't wait to hear it." After Rachel dropped him off at school, I sat alone in the back office, the warm coffee in my hands, and a manuscript resting on my desk. A real manuscript. The softest exit. A true story of leaving quietly and living loudly. I had finished it 2 weeks ago. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished by some fancy ghostwriter. But it was mine. Every word came from the version of me who had once been too afraid to speak up, and the version who had eventually stood in court and said, "I'm not going to be silent anymore." I had sent it to a small indie press a month ago. Their reply came in yesterday. They wanted to publish it. They loved that it was honest, unapologetically real. Not some overnight transformation or fairy tale. Just the story of a woman who survived, grew, and chose herself. Later that afternoon, I picked Eli up from school, and we stopped for milkshakes. He insisted we get matching ones, vanilla with rainbow sprinkles. "Can we go to the lake this weekend?" he asked, kicking his feet under the table. "Of course," I said. "You want to build a giant sandcastle again?" "Yup. With a fox tower." "Obviously." Back home, after dinner, Eli sat on the floor drawing while I curled up on the couch, thumbing through the copy-edited version of my manuscript. Every page felt like a map, one I'd charted through fire, fear, and healing. There was a knock on the door. I tensed, just for a second. But it was just Rachel, carrying wine and a giant pizza box. "We're celebrating," she said. "What are we celebrating?" I asked, though I already knew. She grinned. You. The book. The bakery. The fact that you haven't flinched at a knock in months. And the fact that Eli just told my son. My mommy's the strongest woman I know. I laughed, then cried, then poured us both a glass. That night, after Rachel left and Eli was asleep, I stepped out onto the small balcony. The stars above Boulder were unusually bright, the sky clear and still. I thought about Brad, not with anger, but with distance. A name in a chapter I'd already turned. He hadn't tried to contact us in months. And I no longer waited for his shadow around corners. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. And in their place, room to breathe, room to be. In my inbox sat a draft of the book cover. Cream background, elegant serif font. A subtle silhouette of a woman walking away, not in sadness, but in motion. Felt right. I clicked approve. Tomorrow I'd wake up early, pack cupcakes for a bridal order, teach a class on filled pastries, then take Eli to the library. Next month, I'd stand on a small stage at a local bookstore and read the opening lines of my book aloud. But tonight, I sat in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, watching the lights of the city flicker softly below. Somewhere along the way, I stopped surviving and started living. And it didn't happen all at once. It happened in muffins and bedtime stories, in restraining orders and playground laughs, in panic attacks and post-it notes, in burn scars and birthday candles, in choosing my son, and finally choosing myself. I turned back inside, kissed Eli goodnight again, and crawled into bed with my laptop. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked. I smiled and began to write. Chapter 1. I thought I had to stay. I didn't. I thought I was alone. I wasn't. Because maybe someone else out there needed to hear it too. Maybe they were staring at their front door, wondering if they had the strength to walk out. And maybe, just maybe, my story could be their map out.